Today we are in Parsha Vayeitzei, and it's a fascinating Parsha. Yaakov is leaving home to go forward. Actually, he's running away from Esav, and this is going to change his life. And let's hear about how he does it and the attitude that he has. So people look at life and they want to know, why are we here? And the answers of the people who try to answer these questions usually come in two categories. Either it's for ourselves, like to enjoy life and realize our potential, achieve transcendence, or something that has to do with me and what it's about for me. Or it could be that life is in the service of something greater than ourselves, like many people say, to do good for society, or they're part of history, or for God. And people have a sense that both are true, that it is for me and it is for something higher than myself. So on the one hand, we want to explore our potential and get the most out of every experience opportunity. We don't feel that that's selfishness, but it feels like something deep and true in our souls, that we feel that the gifts that we're given and the things that we want to do, that we feel we're here for, we recognize that it's something that's implanted in us by our Creator, and it's intrinsic to our identity and purpose. And that's something that we feel that we want to, that we must bring out. On the other hand, we're equally aware that we're part of something greater than ourselves, that if our existence has meaning, it's only because it serves a reality beyond its own finite and subjective being. So we find that both are expressed by the Torah and in the words of our sages. On one hand, the Torah is repeatedly stressing that God's program for life is for the good of people, both materially and spiritually. The mitzvot were given only to refine humanity, says the Midrash. So that means it's for our good to refine us. And the Talmud states, every man, every person is obligated to say, the world was created for my sake. So that means that I have a purpose in the world, and that for each of us, only I can do what I can do, and you can do what you can do, and each of us is unique, and the world was created to support our godly purpose in the world. The Hasidic masters describe the story of the soul as a descent for the purpose of an ascent, a going down for the purpose of going up. That the soul's entry into the physical state lessens our spiritual sensitivities. When we start out above, we're very spiritually aware. And then coming into the world feels like we don't have that same connection to the spiritual that we had before. But the purpose of it all is that the soul should be elevated by the challenges and achievements of earthly life. So what we're doing here, and where Hashem is bringing us, where God is bringing us into the world, has to do with what's going to elevate our soul. So we're coming down into the world where there's less spiritual sensitivity, but it is meant to awaken us through the challenges and achievements of earthly life to a higher level. On the other hand, so we have a lot of back and forth. Is it for me? Is it for God? Is it for something higher? Is it for mankind, for people? On the other hand, the highest praise that the Torah has for Moses, whom Maimonides calls the most perfect human being, is that he was a servant of God. And our sages repeatedly tell us to strive for doing good in our lives, so that everything we do is permeated with the recognition that I was not created except to serve my Creator. So we're not here just to do stuff. We're here for a godly purpose. And to understand the interplay between these two apparently different goals and the places they hold in our life's purpose, we need to examine a turning point in the life of Jacob, the father of the people of Israel. So Jacob was doing just fine where he was living with his parents. He was learning Torah, he was doing fine, and his brother became resentful of him and threatened. And Jacob's mother said, you have to go and get married. In other words, Jacob was being told that he needed to go out into the world, into the physical world, to further his life's purpose. Now, everything, this is Nachmanides, who's the Ramban, writes that everything that happened to the patriarchs, that means Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is a signpost for their children. So what happened to them is like a signpost for us. And that's why the Torah tells the details of their journeys, their well digging and the other events of their lives. We hear about, okay, so Jacob goes out and he's going to find a wife, but we hear about how he traveled and he had a dream and what happened, and every story is told. And these stories of his life are all coming to instruct us about the future and to instruct us about the future. When something happens to one of these three patriarchs, we understand from it what is decreed to occur to his descendants. So it's not just that it happens to them, it happens to the whole Jewish people as time goes on through the world and through history. More than role models of sources of inspiration, the lives of our forefathers are all inclusive blueprints that map every fork and turn in our own lives. And they address every dilemma and paradox that may confront us. When we have to decide what to do, how do we look at it? In the 28th chapter of Bereshit, of Genesis, the Torah tells us about Jacob's departure from the Holy Land, where he had spent the first half of his life immersed in the tents of learning, and then about his journey to Haran. Now, that's where his mother came from, where Rivka came from. Her family wasn't so wonderful, but it was clear to her that he should not marry a Canaanite, but he should marry somebody from their family. These were actually the descendants of Shem, Noah's son Shem. So in Haran, he found that he met his uncle, his mother's sister, and he was pretty sneaky, very sneaky, not a very good person. And Jacob worked for him for 20 years in the midst of a corrupt and debased society. The name Haran, which in Hebrew means wrath, reflects the fact that it was the object of God's wrath in the world. In other words, God did not like what they were doing. So they were not behaving well. But then the question becomes, so this is really the question. How does Jacob live his life in a society that is so corrupt? How is that going to affect him or not? What is he going to do coming from where he's coming from? In other words, he is a refined person, having learned from Abraham and Isaac, from his grandfather, from his father. And how is he going to be able to keep this going in such a place? And in a certain way, that's what we're really talking about today. In whatever place we're in, how do we keep it going to be the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to do what we're in the world to do? How do we do this to keep this high level of conduct, this high level of behavior wherever we are and whatever the circumstances are. So throughout it all, Jacob remained true to God and man, serving Laban honestly, even though as Laban repeatedly swindled him. Nevertheless, Jacob was careful to observe all the 613 commandments of the Torah while retaining all that he had learned in his years of Torah. So he lived with Torah and godly commandments the whole time, even though nobody else around him was doing that. He remained who he was. He even prospered materially and amassed considerable wealth. In Haran, Jacob also married and fathered 11 of the 12 sons who were to become the 12 tribes of Israel. So the children that he had each of them became part of the Jewish family and tribes on the way to becoming the Jewish people. So our souls, the souls, leave a spiritual life behind, which is an existence steeped in divine awareness and knowledge, not confused by this lower material world. And then he goes to struggle in the employ of a Lavan, a cheat, not a good person, in a Haran environment, an environment that makes God angry because it's not the way God wants it to be. Because the material state is a sneaky deceiver. The material world is accentuating the physical and obscuring the godly. And it's confusing the soul's priorities, and perpetually it is threatening its virtue. So when the soul comes down here, it's like, what is going on here? What is this? And then the world in its own sneaky way says, well, that's all there is here. That's the real thing. That's what it's all about. But every soul is empowered as a child of Jacob. It's in our genes, our spiritual genes, to make this a descent for the purpose of an ascent. To come into the world, the soul comes into the world in this case being Haran, where he was, and come out of Haran with material wealth, with its integrity intact and its memory true. So not only does it return with its spiritual powers, awakened by the challenge, it's a wealthier soul. What does it mean, a wealthier soul? That it learned how to bring out the forces and resources of the physical world to further its spiritual ends. So what is it here for? To make this world a place where God is known. And when we are able to come into the world and utilize the physical to integrate with the spiritual, then we're doing what we're here to do. Now, most important, in its spiritual state, up there, the soul is perfect, but unable to have active results. The soul can't do anything up there. It can be, and it's wonderful, living in a state of bliss in a much higher place. But only as a physical being on physical earth can the soul fulfill the divine commandments, which are the soul's descendants and its link to the infinite and the eternal. When we do a commandment in this world, first of all, these are the descendants of the soul. What does that mean? It means that when we do a mitzvah, what happens is that we are bringing godliness into the world, more godliness, like more children. The soul has the children of the commandments that we do. But also because the mitzvah, the commandment, is coming from the highest place of God's desire, What happens is that when we do it down here in this lowest place, we have the connection from the lowest to the highest, to God himself. Now, when he was traveling on his way to Haran, Jacob camped for the night on Mount Moriah. Mount Moriah is actually the place where later the temple would be built, the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. And space came together, and this is where he slept. And when he woke up, and I want to mention also that he took stones and put them around his head, not around his whole body. This is another topic altogether, but the reason that he put the stones around his head was to protect his head, to protect the way that he thought and his attitudes. He wasn't worried about his body, but he felt like it was essential to take care of his mind, his head, his attitude. And so when he woke up, interestingly, each of those stones that he had placed around him became one stone. They wanted to be one, and they miraculously became one stone. And Jacob took the stone on which he had slept, and he set it up as a monument. That means that in those days, that was something that was done. We don't do it now, although he was in the right place for an offering because it was where the Holy Temple was going to be. But he then made an oath. And this oath is what we're going to look at right now. What is the oath? And I have to remember, we're at the juxtaposition point between where he's coming from, which is a beautiful holy place with holy family, to where he's going to. And where he's going to has to do with his service in the world. And how is he going to handle this so that where he's coming from would bring him to the place God wanted him to go to? How is he going to do this? So he made an oath, which the Torah says in 3 verses. So we're going to look at this. First verse is, if God will be with me and safeguard me on this road that I am traveling, and he will provide me with bread to eat and clothes to wear, continues, and I will return in peace to my father's house, and God will be my God. And this stone, which I have erected as a monument, shall be a house of God. So these were the 3 statements. So this brings up some questions. So the oath has 2 parts. The first part is the preconditions for the fulfillment. If God will be with me and provide me bread to eat and clothes to wear, etc. And what Jacob is promising to do. This stone shall be a house of God. But it's not clear where the first part ends and the later part begins, where what he's asking for from God, how does that connect to what he is promising to God? So the first of the 3 verses is obviously part of the conditions, things that God will do for Jacob to enable him to fulfill his vow. So give me food to eat and clothing to wear. So in other words, take care of me so that I could do the things that you're sending me to do. And the same for, and I will return in peace to my father's house. In other words, his intention wasn't to go out and stay out. His intention was to get a wife, perhaps to make a family, and bring them back. So he's saying, if you'll take care of me while I'm going out and bring me back, then this is what I'm asking you to do. The 3rd verse speaks of what Jacob will do for God. But then there is a part that's exactly in the middle. And it says, and God will be my God. So it comes right after what I need you to do to help me, and right before the oath. And God will be my God. So the question is this part of the conditions for the vows fulfillment? If you'll be my God, then I'll make this oath for you. Or is it part of the purpose of the vow? So Rashi explains, so we're going to discuss two approaches on this. According to Rashi, the first two verses are the conditions, and the third verse is what the vow is. In order for making the stone a house of God, he has to experience the Almighty as his God. So Rashi is saying that he has to experience God as his God. Otherwise, why is he making an oath? But the Ramban, Nachmanides, sees the words, and God will be my God as part of the vow itself, not as a condition. Not just if I'm going to feel that God is God. But in any case, God will be my God. That's my oath. And as Nachmanides understands, Jacob is saying that if God will provide him with protection, food, clothing, and a peaceful return, taking care of him, he will make God his God and the stone a dwelling place for the divine presence. So what do these two interpretations mean? And why does the Torah express Jacob's oath in such a way that it allows for different understandings? This is very important because each of us also goes out into the world. And each of us needs to make a commitment to God. Otherwise, we're just wandering around doing whatever we're doing, So there has to be more than that. So our sages describe the purpose of creation as God's desire for a dwelling place in the lower realms, that God should be known here to us, that God isn't just up there, but God is here with us. So God desired that there should be a reality that is inhospitable to spirituality, like a Haran, and inhospitable to godliness, and that this alien place should be made into a dwelling for him, an environment receptive to his goodness and truth. So we need to make the world a place where God is known. That's what God wants. And the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the Alter Rebbe, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, in his Tanya says, this lowly realm is our physical world, of which none is lower, in the sense that it obscures the light of God, to the extent that it contains forces which actually oppose God with the claim that I am the ultimate. There's a little expression that some people say, I am a self-made man and I worship my creator. So that's a person who thinks whatever he's the big doer. I mean, we need to do things, but what makes it succeed is God. But if he thinks he's the whole creator and he worships himself, to have that in the world means that this is the lowest world. And this is the place where it's the greatest concealment of divine truth. So a spiritual entity, like an idea or a feeling. So when we're looking at something spiritual, it exists to express something. And a physical entity just exists. It's very interesting. There are schools of art, literature, and they ask the question, does it have to have meaning or not? And that there are those that say, it doesn't mean anything, I just made it. I don't know, I liked it, so I made it. Now, you could make it, but does it speak to you? Does it say anything? Is there any message in it? And so when it's a spiritual entity, you look at it and it means something to you, or you make it because it means something to you. When it's just a thing, a physical entity, it just exists. And there's no meaning to it at all. And that can happen only in this world, in this lowest world. So the spiritual is conveying that there is something greater than myself, which I serve. The physical proclaims I am, contesting the truth that God is the ultimate and exclusive reality. But when a person utilizes the resources and forces of the physical world to serve God, he sanctifies the material so that the material now serves rather than obscures the divine truth. That means when we're using something for the service of God, then there is a purpose. Now, you look, for example, at a watch. Many people don't even wear watches these days because they have their phones. But if you look at a watch, what is it for? It's good. It's fine for it to look beautiful to you. That's just fine. Because God is giving me something beautiful. But why am I wearing a watch? So that I could show up to serve God. In other words, I'm taking a piece of metal that is material and saying, God is giving me this, which looks beautiful to me, this object, which I can utilize and enlist into the service of God. So it's not just, and it's fine to wear a bracelet, just that it looks beautiful to you, but it could have meaning. You got it for a special occasion, or you're grateful that it just makes you happy. But everything is part of, if it makes you happy, then it should be part of gratitude to God. Thank you for giving me a bracelet that I like, that I enjoy, that was a gift, that I feel happy to wear. Thank you. So we keep including God in this world in whatever we're doing. So then what happens is that the material serves rather than hiding the divine truth. Instead of I exist, the material now expresses I exist to serve my Creator. Instead of I am the ultimate, it now proclaims I for myself am nothing. My sole function and significance is that I am an instrument of godliness. And each of us comes from the one God. God made us unique in unique bodies with unique circumstances and unique situations, but we are all coming from the one God that enlivens us in every moment. And that's something we need to know. So even though we are uniquely different, we are also the same because we're expressions of the one God. So here is Jacob going by himself out into the world. And he makes this oath. And he says, this stone will be a house of God. What is Jacob doing? He is pledging himself to our mission in life. He is himself pledging himself to do the mission, to fulfill the divine purpose for creation by making the material world a dwelling for God. He's promising to make the stone. The stone is just stuff, the basic stuff of the physical world, into a divine abode. He's promising to make even the lowest level of existence into a home for God. So even the lowest level, a stone, is meant to be a home for God. And he's going to use this as a place he'll come back to worship God. And ultimately, this place becomes the place of the temple in Jerusalem. So how will he accomplish this? So Jacob is requiring several things from God: protection from harm, food to eat, clothes to wear, a peaceful return to his father's home. Now, he's not negotiating a payment. If you'll do this for me, then I'll do that for you. He's not doing that. He's saying that these conditions, both material and spiritual, are what will enable a soul to live in a physical body and achieve the aim of making the world a home for God. So on the material level, there are basic needs: food, clothing, security, that are required to keep the body and soul together. So he's asking for that. On the spiritual level, Jacob is also asking for the divine gifts, without which man could not gain mastery over his environment and develop it in accordance with God's will. So he's asking that he should have the physical things he needs and the spiritual wisdom and whatever it is, we're going to talk about that for a moment, that he needs in order to know how to go into the world. How do we know how to go out into the world? How do we know how to serve God? How do we know how to make this world a place where God is revealed? So he asked for safeguards.
For safeguards?
Safeguards. And what does that mean? Laws that identify those forces and influences that are harmful to the soul and to its mission in life. So what he's asking for is that God should make clear to him the divine prohibitions. Don't do that. It's going to lead you to the wrong place. These are the divine prohibitions which guard us against the spiritual pitfalls in our journey in life. In other words, the places where God says, do not do that. And we teach that to our little children. When the light is red, don't cross the street. When the light is green, you can cross the street. In other words, you have to know where not to go, what isn't going to work, what's going to lead to the wrong place. So these are safeguards because they guard us against the dangers of our journey in life. So when it's telling us don't do that, those are saying those are not the values that are going to help you. Don't do that. Then it says he's asking for food to eat, bread. He's asking for bread, food to eat. What does that mean? That means the divine knowledge and wisdom of Torah, which our sages call food for the soul. So in other words, this is the Torah. The Torah is, when we learn Torah, it's digested and internalized by the soul to become the part of the body itself. So what we learn in Torah is what nourishes us. The Torah is nourishing us, and it forms the mindset and character that we have. This is very, very essential. How do we have a mindset to know what's good for us to do, how to behave in the world? The Torah is teaching us this. Then he asked for clothing to wear. And these are all symbols that are spoken of in the Torah and Tanya. And what is clothing? Garments. The positive mitzvot, the positive commandments, are called the garments of the soul. And because these positive commandments are beyond our understanding, we don't understand what it actually means in reality. When God is telling a Jew, do not eat meat and milk together, why? Okay, so there are certain things that we can learn about it, certain understandings that we can get, but that's only to a certain degree. Ultimately, these laws are kind of surrounding us. The Torah we take into us, and it becomes our flesh and blood, but these positive commandments are like a cloak around us, like a garment. And then he says, and I'm asking you that I will return in peace to my father's house. So the word Return means tshuva. So this has to do, usually it has to do with when we do something wrong that we want to return. So help us to return to the right path. In general, people make mistakes sometimes and do the wrong thing. And we say, help me to return to you, that I could start again and do it the right way. But it also, there's a higher level of tshuva, which is, all this has to do with restoring a relationship with God. Whether it's because we've done something that took us away from our relationship, but on the highest level, tshuva can refer to a person who's fixing his past by channeling the negative energy of his transgressions to fuel his yearning for deeper connection to God. In other words, I did not do this right. Really sorry, but now I want to do it the right way for you. But tshuva, return, also has to do with a person who never did sin. What does that mean? He can use the ordinary mundane elements of life, including the things that are not directly involved in the performance of a mitzvah, to serve a godly purpose, so that he could say, what could I do to connect to you more? It's very interesting that on the level of a friend or on the level of family, that sometimes we give each other gifts. Why? Or sometimes we say, what can I do for you? Or can I take you out for lunch or coffee? We're trying to say, I want to do something for you so that our connection could get even stronger. But for God, we're saying, whatever I'm doing, I want to do it for you. So how can I know you? With there's a commandment, know him in all your ways. That means that in whatever we're doing, to say, I'm here for you. I want to make this for you. I want to do this for you. So what is this, all of this godliness have to do with personal fulfillment? Remember, the question was, is it for personal fulfillment or is it for serving God? So can the dwelling for God in the lowly realms be made mechanically? When we do a mitzvah, a commandment, we're fulfilling it or doing whatever we're doing, could it be like people who are working for an employer, but they don't have any understanding or appreciation for what they're doing? Okay, I'll do it for you. Want me to do it for you? I'll do it for you. Can a person serve God without experiencing him as a personal and intimate presence in his life? Okay, I'll do it for you. Does that work? Can you say, God, you want me to do it? I'll do it. Okay, to get the paycheck, I have to do that. So if you want me to do that, I'll do that. But that's the question. Can we really serve God without experiencing connection with God? And the answer is no. God wants that we will serve him. How does it say? With all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. That our life's work should not be that we're like robots, just doing some old-fashioned commandments coming from a God who can't be understood, but that it's a labor of love that stimulates our minds, excites our emotions, and fulfills all of our talents. So that was the question. Is this another condition or is this part of the mission itself? Rashi, and it says Rashi comes only to explain the simple meaning of the verse. He's the major commentator of the Torah, views the issue just in simplicity. Why was a person created? To serve his creator. Rashi explains everything else is a condition. It's a means to the end. If it's required that a person should experience fulfillment in life, then God gives him this ability. Just as God gives him all the other necessary tools to do his job. But all this is secondary to his purpose in life, which is to make the world a home for God. The Ramban, Nachmanides, on the other hand, reads the Torah through the lens of a mystic and a Kabbalist, with an eye to looking at how do we experience life. And from this perspective, man's experience of the divine is not just a tool, but the purpose of life. So the Kabbalistic teachings describe the purpose of creation, that God should be known by his creations, or in order to do good to his creation. So that's the purpose of life. Ultimately, we should know God right here. Not just that we bring something to God, but that we should know God right here. And ultimately, these are various expressions of our purpose, which is God's desire to be known in this lower world. So we learn that these different opinions in Torah, it says these and these are both the word of the living God. This is pointing us to paradox. In order to get a glimpse of the true picture, there needs to be different perspectives. So, there is, this is it. This is the watch. On the other hand, here is where I can change the time. Oh, and here is where if there needs to be a battery change, this needs to be opened in the back. And this is slim. And this is the right length for me. In other words, when we look at every opinion, it gives us a bigger part of the whole. So this is the soul's elevation. What makes the soul go up to a higher level, to a deeper relationship with God, is through its sanctification of physical life, through what goes on here. So that's both a condition for and a component part of the purpose of creation. So we need to know God in order to do what we're really here to do. Also, we want to know God, and we do what we can to try to know God better. There's a Rebbitzin who lives in Los Angeles. Her husband passed away some years ago. I didn't really know him because by the time I came to California, I didn't live near where he lived, and I didn't have the background of years of getting together with them and knowing them. Then he passed away. And I told his wife after some time, I'm so sorry. And he was an extraordinary person, an amazing Rav. And I told his wife, I'm so sorry that I didn't get to know him better. And her response was, me too. It was a very beautiful, paradoxical answer. She knew him. They were married since they were very young. Baruch Hashem, they were married for many years, had many children. She knew him well. But she also realized she would have liked to know him better, because there's always more coming out. So there really is both, that we dedicate ourselves to God, but we want to know God more and better. And we actually get to know God more and better through knowing God in whatever we're doing. So that's the work. And because the egotistical nature of man is also part of the stone, the material, part of the lower physicality of God's creation, the ego also has to be developed into a house of God, into an environment hospitable to the divine truth. So we need to make ourselves connected to God. We are connected to God, but we need to make that an aware connection. So if our service of God is to be something that we just said, okay, if you want me to do it, okay, fine, like the employer, then that wouldn't be a real dwelling in the lower realm. It would mean that the physical reality has not been transformed into a place where we reveal the godliness. A true dwelling in the holy realm is a product of the lower realm, a product of physical people. which we appreciate with our minds, that we want with our hearts, and that we want to do with our physical selves. So an integral part of God's dwelling is a human self for whom God is my God, for whom a life in the service of the Almighty is deeply satisfying and the ultimate in self-realization. And this is something we need to work on in marriage, in friendship. We talk about how we need to develop it, how we need to take care of it, that just because we, made breakfast for our husband yesterday doesn't mean we don't do it today, because he also was hungry today. So when we think, what can I do to make our connection? So that's what some people do, different people do different things. But whatever it is that we feel makes a connection is how we develop our relationship with another person and also with God. If this is something God wants me to do, I want to do it. If this is something God does not want me to do, I do not want to do it. Why do I not want to do it? Because God doesn't want me to do it. And I want to develop my relationship with God. Now, if somebody's going to try to make the spiritual very material, but tell me the reason. Tell me the reason. This is not about reason. This is beyond reason. If this is something God does not want me to do, I do not want to do it. Do I understand? It's very often a joke that the husbands put, sugar and cream, and they pile all kinds of stuff into their coffees. And the wives say, come on, you have to eat that much sugar? I don't know that that's so good for you. You know what? Even though we may or may not convince them, but we will give it to them if that's important to them, because that is part of, look, our connection, our relationship is the most important thing. So with this attitude that I am asking God to take care of me, why am I asking God to take care of me? So that I could serve God and know God better and better and better, so that I can build my relationship with God stronger and stronger. Now, the truth is our relationship with God is total, because there is nothing but God. But but God hides himself so that we can find him, so that we can choose him. So with this attitude, Jacob was able to descend from Beersheba to Haran. And he asked to succeed in his purpose of going out into the world to illuminate it without being negatively affected. He wanted to come back whole, like he was when he left, like he was when he was a soul. He didn't want to forget his soul connection with God, or with Abraham and Isaac. So Jacob, through this oath, dedicates himself to a higher purpose, to carry out what he needs to do for the sake of fulfilling God's mission of lighting up the exile. When he does his mission in this way, it's not about me, ready to show up with all the talents and abilities that God's giving him, he's ready. He's already ready to do it. And he's really here for God, with God in any situation. So we have faith in God, and we trust that God's providence is sending us and directing us for God's purpose. God has faith in us that we are dedicated to carrying out God's mission in the places and situations where we go. So we trust God, and God trusts us. So that even when we feel alone, we turn to God and know that God is here. He goes through a lot. In this Parsha, he goes through a lot. But by the end of the Parsha, after Jacob has worked with dedication to God, we see that after working for Lavan for 20 years, 7 years for Rachel, that means with no pay, he worked for 7 years to earn Lavan's daughter in marriage. And Lavan switched the bride for Leah. And then he worked another 7 more years for Rachel. So he's married then to both of them, which is not allowed since the Torah was given, but at that time it was done. Then Lavan protests Jacob's leaving and says, how could you leave? How could you take my family with me? So he works another 6 years to earn sheep so that when he goes back home, that he can have an income from the sheep, from his flocks. So, and that's a whole interesting, miraculous story in itself. And then Lavan's sons accuse Jacob of getting rich at Lavan's expense, even though it was Lavan who was trying to trick Jacob, not the other way. And God tells Jacob to leave. Jacob speaks with Rachel and Leah, who say, he treats us like strangers. He sold us and spent the money. So they say, why are we staying here? There's no reason to stay here. He doesn't care about us. Let's go. And then Jacob has to escape. He knows that if he's going to ask and say, I would like to leave, let's make a dinner and then I'll go, that Lavan will say, no way. So Lavan, who has the completely worldly, materialistic view of life, doesn't see Jacob as a person. And he wants to pull him down. So Jacob goes away when Lavan and his sons are away with his family, and Lavan pursues him and catches up and says, the daughters are my daughters. Remember, these are the daughters that he sold for money. The daughters are my daughters. The sons are my sons, referring now to the grandchildren. The flocks are my flocks, even though he worked to earn them. All that you see is mine. That is the materialistic point of view. It's all about me and nothing else. So Lavan, who doesn't see Jacob as a person, is the expression of the materialistic world that wants to drag holiness down, because their position is nothing has any depth or meaning. It's all mine. And if it's not mine, it's not fair, because it should be mine, and all that. Now, Jacob is nobody else's property, and he will not be exploited. Jacob knows that he's part of God and that we belong to God. His oneness in God and his dedication guides him to survive and thrive. So what we see here is how Jacob overcame personal challenges from his surroundings. How did he do this? He showed the infinite power of the godly soul. He knew that I am a soul in a body. And he knew that even a hostile environment couldn't prevent its expression. He knows that regardless of the situation, his dedication remains firm. This is our message. His dedication remains firm. And so he always remains free of being pulled down. In this way, each of us, descendants of Jacob, extend the sphere of holiness. This is our job. So when we have a powerful effect on the body and the world through our actions, the body and the world become totally in sync with God's will. That's how it's going to be when Mashiach comes, which is going to be at any time now, when we will all recognize that we are in sync with God's will. So as Jacob desired, our work is to sense God in everything, so we can see the one God as our God, the one God who is always expressing himself as the God who enlivens everything and can be revealed through us. We want to reveal godliness through what we do, through how we behave, how we handle a situation, and how we express ourselves through knowing God in all that we do. So may God bless us. Should always know that God is with us. And this attitude of Jacob, which became part of our spiritual DNA, is how we are here to change the world. So be blessed.